Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome to a special Week 0 edition of the Bet the Board podcast. I'm Brad Powers, filling in for the guys Todd Furman and Payne Insider for this upcoming week's slate of games. It's a small one, but it is college football, and it is game action, stuff we've been waiting 8 months for. Don't worry, the guys will be back next week as we break down the biggest games of Week 1. But prior to that, I got something special in store for you guys, a little bit different here. First off, I will dive deep into the couple of FBS games for the upcoming weekend. We got Florida State and Georgia Tech, and also SMU and Nevada. We got a couple of FBS versus FCS games I'll give you a couple of nuggets on. And I'll even do you a step further. All the small games next week, all the games that we won't discuss next week. I'll give you a couple sentences on all those games. So we are going to do a first here as far as Bet the Board and cover about 30-plus games and try to do it in under an hour. Oh, yeah, by the way, for those of you that follow our conference previews, obviously Notre Dame doesn't play in a conference, so we didn't get to a deep dive on the Notre Dame football team this upcoming season. I will do a deep dive on Notre Dame at the end of the podcast. And then at the very end, got a very special best bet. My favorite win total left on the board that has, in my opinion, some incredible value. If it was opening up at this number, it would be one of my favorite bets of the entire offseason. So we've got a very special best bet at the end of the podcast as far as a win total. Let's not beat around the bush here. Let's get right to the game. It kicks off in Ireland, ESPN. Noon Eastern kick time. College Game Day will actually kick off there at 9 a.m. Eastern. They're moving the show there to Ireland. Got a pretty decent ACC matchup between Florida State and Georgia Tech. Two teams that didn't play each other last year, but we do have both teams, as far as power ratings go, in the top 50. Florida State, borderline top 10 team, even with all the roster turnover. But this is a Florida State team, obviously, still probably recovering from what happened at the end of last season, which done a disservice, starting with the injury to Jordan Travis. A team goes unbeaten in Power 5 play, wins their conference championship, gets left out of the playoffs, and then gets steamrolled in the bowl game by 60. So it'll be interesting to see what frame of mind Florida State is in. I've actually been a little bit more optimistic on Florida State in a lot of the betting markets, including win total. This is a team that just, on the surface, you only see 9 returning starters, but like they usually do, Mike Norvell brings in a lot of quality transfers. Now, particular, if you want to, get a deep dive as far as Florida State football goes, obviously you're going to check out the ACC podcast that Payne, Todd, and myself did a couple months ago for that. And obviously, Payne, he dives in really deep to the Florida State team. But as far as this game, keep in mind their offense coordinator, Alex Adkins, for Florida State, he can't be on the sideline, so he's suspended the first 3 games of the season due to an NCAA investigation. So that could be a little bit of concern, but keep in mind Mike Norvell is the play caller. And speaking of that FSU offense against this Georgia Tech defense, I do think there's an edge for this Florida State offense here, clearly. And you're talking about a Georgia Tech defense that allowed 221 yards rushing last year per game, 5.4 yards per carry. How did that stack up? Well, it was the worst rush defense at the Power 5 level. That Georgia Tech defense lost their top couple of pass rushers, lost their top player in the secondary. Florida State, as far as fall camp goes, really likes their run game, what they're seeing there. They like their offensive line, to say the least. There's finally some size. There's finally some depth. They're saying it's their best offensive line in at least a decade. It has been a program weakness if you've followed Florida State for quite some time. So Florida State, offensive edge here. And I'll tell you what, Payne did text me a few hours ago. He gave me the rundown. I'll get you some Florida State detailed notes here in just a second. Let's flip over to the other side of the ball. Georgia Tech's offense against Florida State's defense. Strength on strength probably here. I mean, Georgia Tech's offense certainly better than their defense. But Florida State's defense, very well thought of. Maybe not as much depth as last year, but their front end starters are probably the best in the ACC in my opinion this year. Let's start with Georgia Tech's quarterback Haynes King, underrated quarterback, lots of mobility in my opinion. Pretty deceiving as a runner. I think he, with his long strides, he surprises defenders, it looks like, on the field. One thing he has to do is cut turnovers down this year, 16 interceptions. One thing I worry about Georgia Tech specific to this matchup is they just do not have much size at the skill position. Obviously, Florida State, one of the bigger, more lengthier teams in the conference. I mean, you're looking at a Georgia Tech top running back, 5'9", 190, top two wide receivers, 5'11", 190, 5'9", 170. They're productive players, but they're going to be outmanned and outsized in this game. And again, I mentioned, Florida State's defense not as deep this year, but they could be statistically better this year. Keep in mind, a lot of their starters were on snap counts on the defensive side last year. Their top guys didn't play majority of games. They're going to have to play a little bit more this year just because they don't have as much quality depth. I like Adam Fuller back. He's growing on me as a defense coordinator. I think he's gone from okay to a really good defense coordinator, in my opinion, nationally. So, if I had to do an edge here, I'm going to give a slight edge to Florida State's defense, big edge to Florida State's offense. So why is this line only 10.5? Well, I mean, all summer long, we're talking about, money coming in on Georgia Tech and even more money this week as we talked to it. In fact, the line hit 10 earlier on Tuesday. It didn't last very long. It seems to be the buyback position on Florida State, but a lot of one-way action as far as this market goes. Have I made a bet on the game yet? No, I haven't. I would have probably, if push came to shove, I would have laid that 10 just so I could have some action on the game and laid it there with Florida State. Pure power rating for me has kind of been in no man's land. I made it 12. So, keep in mind this line opened 13.5. We're down to, 11.5 for a lot of the summer. And then obviously ticked down even further this week here on game week down to 10.5. So 10 is a bet on Florida State for me, but nothing big. Let's get to Payne's notes here as far as Florida State goes. Specific to their offense, he says there's going to be some variance in making their games difficult to gauge. When they can hit the deep, explosive play action, it's going to be a tough offense because the ground game is going to be good. Depth on the line. Expect guys to rotate on that offensive line. They got depth at running back. Expect guys to rotate there. Against a team like Georgia Tech this week, where the Yellow Jackets could struggle to defend the run. Florida State has the ability to run for points late, so they like Benson at running back. He's improved. Brown has speed. They like the tight end. And Benson at wide receiver, I should say. They haven't had much consistency at wide receiver, so that's the question mark there. Defense, secondary looks all world. But the question always is if the defense, if your one side of the ball looks really good, is it the chicken? They're actually the lead, or is it the egg? The wide receiver group isn't great. They're going to find out at least this week against a quality Georgia Tech offense. Payne leans more towards the secondary, going to be really good, which again, matchup wise is going to negate Georgia Tech there. Linebacker, according to Payne, isn't a strength, but it's not a significant weakness. Cam Riley's been a significant addition for him. Cryer and Nicholson carried their late spring improvement into the fall. Lundy is healthy. He had missed early part of fall camp dealing with something. The D-line is interesting. Marvin Jones injured his ankle the day before fall camp. He ramped it back up, showed well the final 10 days of camp. Patrick Payton's put on weight, developed on and off the field. He's taken on a leadership role. Hester and Turner improved, so the depth should be okay. Depth at tackle, not nearly as good. Grady Kelly from Colorado State, more of a Malcolm Ray replacement than a Fisk replacement. They need Darrell Jackson to be as good as the talent says he should be. Lions improved the last couple of weeks up front there. Sampson's playable. So in theory, he thinks they match up well with Georgia Tech. Should be able to run on offense, throw waves of linemen and running backs at them, and defensive secondary should be fine. The worry is anytime you're facing a mobile quarterback like Haynes King, FSU used Kalen DeLoach in that role last year. Lundy and Riley are the bigger guys. Maybe they're going to be forced to play Blake more in that one. He prefers Earl Little Jr. in the nickel role for this game because he's more physical. He says take a look early in the game to see who Adam Fuller starts there. So that's the insider, specific, the Florida State insider. Payne there as far as the game. But, I asked him, I don't think he's got a big bet yet on this game. He's probably similar in my situation where he needs a little bit cheaper number to go ahead and go with the Noles there. Let's talk the next game, because I did go, 7-8 minutes there. We won't go 7-8 minutes on the remaining 20 or so games I'm going to talk about here. SMU Nevada is the other FBS versus FBS game next week. You look at let's just talk with the line start there. I mean, it's been one-way action for a majority of the summer, all SMU, until today, as I'm recording this late Tuesday night. We finally saw some buyback on Nevada, significant buyback on Nevada, in fact, today, where it's went from 27 to down to 24.5 and even 24 in some spots. So what happened? Well, I mean, injury report for SMU wasn't great. 3 key guys are going to be out. Kamar Wheaton, I mean, these aren't star players, but these are key depth guys. Kamar Wheaton's at running back's out for the season. Their left tackle is going to be out for the game. A guy that wasn't slam dunk to be their starter, but certainly was going to get snaps. And then a backup defensive tackle is going to be out. On top of that, they're expecting the quarterback, Preston Stone. He's going to start, but he could have limited snaps. They're going to give Kevin Jennings some snaps. So that's why you probably saw a little bit of money on Nevada, on top of a couple of market influencers going after Nevada today at plus 27. Speaking of Nevada, I mean, they're off back-to-back their worst 2 seasons of football in school history. They got a new coach, Jeff Choate. He's pretty confident. He's definitely more confident than the market, because the win total on Nevada this year is 2.5. They've had some injury concerns. The running back Patrick Garwo, who's supposed to be in the mix, he's been banged up. Chuba Purdy at quarterback's been banged up. They're going to go with Brendan Lewis. He's going to get the start at quarterback. Sean Dollars will start at running back. Lewis apparently has had a really good fall camp. Hasn't thrown an interception, according to Choate. They added a nice wide receiver post-spring, Jaden Smith from Tarleton State, an FCS school. He's going to get a start. He gives them some size. But for me, not much. Early bet for me was on SMU. Don't think there's great value now. Pure number for me, power ratings wise, is at 25.5. So I'm not really interested. I mean, I probably would, if you had to bet it now and you shopped hard, I would actually be more on the lay in 24 than being on the take here. Keep in mind, SMU dominant against the weak teams last year. I mean, it was a big reason they were number 7 in the country in yards per play margin, number 5 in yards per game margin, number 6 in scoring margin. I mean, they buried those bottom teams in the American last year. The question for SMU this year is, do they have enough quality depth to survive an ACC schedule? So I don't think that's going to be an issue here. And then they got an FCS opponent on deck, so there's really no looking ahead here for the Ponies. Let's move along. There's actually a couple of FBS versus FCS games this upcoming weekend. I think a surprising one that's going to catch a lot of people's eye right now. Montana State, an 11.5-point favorite at New Mexico. If that line stays, it'll be the largest favorite roll ever for an FCS team against an FBS team. So, an historical line, to say the least. Now, immediately when I see something like that, I ask myself, well, how do FCS teams do when you got historical outlier lines? So I just looked at this. When they're a short dog, so they're a 3-point underdog or favored, so the line is 3 or less, or they're favored in a game, how do FCS teams do against FBS teams? 65% against the spread. Now, not a big sample size, 28 games, but 65% with a 4 points per game cover margin isn't too shabby. And, thought process there. And again, I'm speculating. Market really can't fully grasp an FCS team in a favorite role, short dog role against an FBS team. So maybe you're getting a little bit of a discount on the FCS team. We've seen, obviously it's, small, not a very liquid market yet, but we've seen nothing but Montana State action so far with this line continuing to climb up. I think it's deserved. Montana State's number 2 in my FCS power ratings. Lots of return experience for them. They got a very experienced quarterback. So New Mexico's in a kind of a year 0 type of situation under Mendenhall. I love the Mendenhall hire. It's just not much coming back, particularly on offense for them. So I don't know if I'm running the window to bet it now, but if it were to ever climb back into single digits, I would lay it with Montana State. Delaware State, Hawaii is next up. The old bailout game. Especially with it being midnight. How about that, a bailout game for week 0? Hawaii favored by 39. Just I don't know if there's a lot of value here. Believe it or not, my pure power rating on the game is 39.2. So I have not made a bet in this game. Delaware State, if you're not familiar with them, they're a bottom 5 or bottom 10 team in the FCS. Just a really bad program. I mean, to put it in perspective, they played Miami, Ohio, and Army last year, lost by combined 119-20. Didn't cover either game as a significant underdog. They missed their, news on Tuesday, they missed their flight. It's supposed to be a 10-hour flight. They had a 3-hour bus ride to get to the airport. Didn't make it on time, so they're stuck in an airport right now. So not an ideal travel situation now. It's only Tuesday. Game's on Saturday, but spending a night in an airport's not ideal for game prep, especially if you miss a day. There's obviously could be distractions there. You're going to the island. So, boy, if I had to bet the game, the bailout, believe it or not, I'd actually be more interested in laying it than taking it on Hawaii there. I'm going to do something different. In fact, I didn't even tell Payne or Todd I was going to do this. They just said, hey, cover any games that might interest you, the smaller games for week 1. Well, I got to be honest with you. Every game is interesting to me. Week 1, I need data points. I got nothing, especially with roster turnover with the NIL and transfer portal era. All these games are important to collect some data and see how good these teams can be. And obviously you don't want to overreact to what you see in just 1 week, but I do want to see what some of these teams got, particularly teams that have a heavy roster turnover. The game that I think I'm not hot take here. I think the most underrated week 1 game is on Thursday night. And no, it's not North Dakota State at Colorado. It's actually North Carolina and Minnesota. I think it's a very important game for the win total. Big swing game. If you bet either one of the win totals over or under, got Minnesota favored by 2.5. New coaches, coaches starting to feel a little pressure here. So just not that I think there's a big edge in the game. I just think it's a good data point to say the least on what these teams can be this upcoming season. Coastal Carolina, Jacksonville State, the other FBS versus FBS game on Thursday night, is another game that I think can be a really quality, good data point to get an idea of how good these teams could be. They're both bowl teams a year ago. Coastal and the under have gotten a lot of money this summer. I agree with both. So dog and under for me in that one. Jacksonville State's favored by 3.5, totals 56. Let's move to Friday. And again, I'm racing through these. I'm just giving you some general thoughts. Look, lines have been out for 3-4 months. Right now, me personally, I'm not looking to make 10, 12 bets. I've already made 40 or 50 bets on these. I don't think there's a lot of significant value at this point in time unless we get late-breaking injury news, we get weather reports, and obviously there's a whole slate of FCS games, like 80-plus games, where I think there's going to be more value. So that's why I'm just rolling through these. I don't have a lot of best bet, game of the year type of bets here. Temple at Oklahoma. Oklahoma's a significant favorite, and deservedly so. Defense for Oklahoma has been the story in fall camp. Really impressed. I think this could be a top 10 defense, even with a tough schedule in the SEC. Temple is going to be a dumpster fire this year. Underdog in every game. I think it's the last year for their coach. TCU at Stanford, another good data point, I think, to get a feel for both of these teams. Stanford's taking the money in this particular game all summer. Market is high on Stanford, and I'm part of it. They bet over their win total. Still some question marks, and TCU's a tough team to gauge. Obviously, incredible high a couple years ago, going 12-0 in the regular season, getting to the national championship game, and then incredible low, not even making a bowl game last year. Stanford was at the bottom as far as bottom 2-3 team in the country as far as returning experience a year ago in year one under Troy Taylor. Now they're in the top 5 in returning experience, so you don't get that too often. This is going to be one of the most improved teams in the country. Western Michigan and Wisconsin, you might say, hey, a 24-point spread, not going to be a good data point, but I think it will be. I mean, at least I think Western Michigan can be a quality MAC team this year. They're the most experienced MAC team. Tyler Van Dyke on the Wisconsin side is going to get started quarterback, so it's a game I'll be watching. I don't think it's a high-value game, but if you get 24.5, I'd lean Western Michigan there. This is going to sound like a broken record. I think this is a solid data point for this next game, Florida Atlantic, Michigan State. A lot of roster turnover for both. Michigan State's got a new coach. I like Jonathan Smith. Anybody that really does this professionally likes Jonathan Smith quite a bit, but it's going to take him some time here. But we're hearing nothing but positive reviews out of fall camp for their new quarterback, Aiden Childs. True sophomore, new to the team, and he was named a team captain. So like this kid coming out of high school. Got a little bit of action last year at Oregon State, and boy, it could be a tough first year here at Michigan State, but boy, next year I think he takes off. FAU on the other side is going to start a transfer from Marshall, Cam Fancher at quarterback. Not a big fan there. Let's go to the Saturday card quickly. Well, not quickly. We got 20-some games still. FIU, Indiana. Indiana, new coach, new roster. A lot of production that they brought in, though, through the portal. They went for production over potential. I will say, just reading the tea leaves in the market, 21 seems like the resistance spot. I've seen a little bit of FIU tickets there at 21, but nothing, screams value for me. Kent State at Pittsburgh. I think the most interesting thing for me is Pitt is going to have this new high-tempo offense. I mean, it's almost, I'll believe it when I see it. The market really hasn't reacted yet to that. Kent State's offense should be improved, though. I mean, keep in mind they had 0 returning starters last year on offense, and they're much more experienced this year. Connecticut, Maryland, for me, is interesting just because, 2 big movers throughout the course of the summer. UConn has taken a ton of money. Under's taken a ton of money. There's certainly concerns about Maryland's quarterback situation there. They haven't figured it out yet, and we're less than 2 weeks out for the game. So that you've seen a lot of money on the dog and under here. Kennesaw State, UTSA is next. Tough to power rate Kennesaw State. They basically redshirted a lot of guys last year. Program, though, to me, keep in mind I do power rate FCS, and I've been doing it the last several years now. Their power rating's gone down as a program, though, compared to what it was 3-4 years ago. So I'm a little worried there. Seeing UTSA take the money. Next game, it might not sound like a sexy matchup, but I'm going to tell you what. As far as betting circles, this is going to be a lot of eyeballs on this game. Eastern Michigan, Massachusetts, because we have 2 competing big-time market influencers on opposite sides here. We've seen people take UMass +1, UMass at pick. We saw on Tuesday Eastern Michigan +3 get hammered. Am I going to break the tiebreaker here and take a side? I'm not. I think Massachusetts 1 is about right. So unless I get something that I read that I really like on either side in the next 10 days, I'm going to sit this one out and see which of the market influencers gets off to a hot start here, because there's some variety of varying opinions, I should say, on both of these teams. Next up, Ohio, Syracuse. Money's been on Syracuse all summer long in a lot of markets. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but we'll get back. That's a big hint for later. Ohio, though, is a bottom 5 team in returning experience. They just lack a lot of it. They're off back-to-back 10-win seasons for the first time in school history. But my goodness, if you're doing a power rating, you're downgrading Ohio among the most in the country. Syracuse has upgraded their talent level in just one off season under their new coach, but 17.5 now. I mean, you're starting to ask Syracuse to cover some numbers against, an Ohio team that I still think can make a bowl game this year. We'll see if Syracuse can do that. Georgia State, Georgia Tech's next. A lot of uncertainty with Georgia State. New coach. He got hired late in the process, actually during the middle of spring. But I got to tell you, not a good spot for Georgia Tech off the Ireland trip. So a long trip back. We'll see how much effort is put in the Florida State game. If it's a close game, which some people looks like they're expecting to be the case with all the Georgia Tech money, are they gassed a little bit? If so, I don't know if I want to lay 21. Old Dominion, South Carolina, I would lay it here with the big favorite in this one. Lots of positive reports about South Carolina's quarterback, Lenora Sellers. Gamecocks defense is apparently looking good as well in fall camp. I'm a part of the South Carolina money in this game. Next up, James Madison, Charlotte. And we're just rolling here. I'm just giving you some quick thoughts. Something different. And again, you can hit us up on social media to see if you like this kind of format. If you don't, say so. We love you, the listener, and we do react to what we hear and what we do. James Madison, Charlotte's next. New coach, new roster for James Madison. Significant downgrade in the power rating. Charlotte's taking money. They were 10.5, 11-point dog in some spots when this opened up, down to 7. I wouldn't be chasing it now because I still like Bob Chesney. And Charlotte's roster, big-time turnover yet again. I I'm kind of passing at the current number there. Next up, Boise State, Georgia Southern. Boise State, I think, has been in the news here the last couple of days. They're going to go with Maddox Madsen at quarterback. I think a lot of people are surprised they're not going to go with Malachi Nelson, the former 5-star from USC. I'm not as shocked as the rest of the market. Keep in mind, they like Madsen at some points last year over Taylon Green, who's going to be the starting quarterback at Arkansas this year. So Madsen must be just a very petty player, consistent, doesn't turn it over. He's gotten some snaps. He's been okay, so I didn't really touch Boise State's power rating. I think the ceiling on this Boise State team has probably come down a little bit because, man, if Malachi Nelson had lived up to that 5-star billing, I mean, Boise State slam dunk might be the best group of 5 team in the country this year, but I think the floor is still good here with Madsen. Southern Miss, Kentucky. Kentucky's been a little bit banged up fall camp, including their running back's probably out for this game. I do like Kentucky in the trenches this year, but nothing big on this game so far. Speaking of big, though, how about this point spread? Ohio State, a 50.5-point favorite against Akron. That's only the 11th time in the last 20 years we've had a 7-touchdown-plus point spread involving a pair of FBS teams. I immediately am like, well, how does the favorite do in a unbelievable big point spread? Actually, not good. 3-7 in those previous 10. If you include the games against FCS opponents where you get a lot of these big point spreads, favorites aren't great. 50-75 and a couple of pushes against the spread is a 49-point or higher favorite. Do the math, 40%. So I'm not a big trend guy, but, I mean, a lot of times when you see outliers, I want to see how the outliers perform, and big favorites don't do that well. Significant favorites. There's a big difference between being a 21-point favorite and a 49-plus point favorite. Another big favorite, Arizona, lane 30. Here's an interesting nugget for me. Obviously, already talked that New Mexico, big underdog, in week 0 against Montana State a few minutes ago. This is a week 1 game, so immediately I start thinking, how do teams do playing game 2 against a team playing game 1? It's Arizona's season opener. New Mexico's already played a game. I think a lot of Joe Q public is going to want to bet the team that they've already seen. Hey, game under their belt. I mean, that should be an advantage. It's not. 400-game sample size the last 10-plus years. Having film on your opponent is better than actually playing the game because the team playing game 2 against the team playing game 1 is just 44% against the spread. So that system or trend or whatever you want to call it, it says Arizona. Not a big bet, but again, just keep that in mind that especially in the film age where you can really dissect an opponent's film, it's better to have that film than to actually play a game. Wyoming, Arizona State's going to be one of the late games. Really good data point for both. Wyoming's got a new coach. They're really excited about their new quarterback, Swoboda. 6'5", 245, started against Texas last year and really looked good in that game. Kind of a Josh Allen clone, so keep an eye on him. Arizona State should be improved in year 2 under Dillingham. Colorado State, Texas, interesting for a multitude of reasons. Number 1, cluster injuries at running back for Texas. Market was already down on Texas even prior to those injuries this summer. Sharp betting group on Tuesday hammered Colorado State pretty good in this one. Texas down to a 32.5-point favorite. UTEP at Nebraska next. Couple of storylines here. Dylan Raiola, the true freshman 5-star, going to get the start for Nebraska at quarterback. Interesting, on Tuesday, Matt Rule, back to his Temple days, he gives out these single-digit numbers, the 10 toughest guys on the team, so 0 through 9 numerically on the roster. It was just announced on Tuesday. I just thought of the 10 players that got the single-digit number, 9 were on defense. And then the one offensive player was a Wake Forest transfer at wide receiver. So take that with what you will. The defense should be good this year, but you would think one of the returning offensive players might have been worthy of getting one of those numbers. Wasn't the case. I will say, from the practice footage that I've seen, this looks like a bigger, stronger, faster team. Big difference between this year and what I've seen from Nebraska the last 6-7 years. The season win total, though, also says that at 7.5. A few more games here, and then we'll get to a deep dive on Notre Dame, and then a best bet at the end. Miami of Ohio at Northwestern. This will be that first look at Northwestern's new makeshift stadium right on the lake, 15,000. They already got it built. We'll see what happens here. I thought David Brown last year as an interim coach did about as good of a job as anybody in the country. Will we see regression this year? I think we will, and maybe this line's saying that, and that Northwestern's only a 4-point favorite. UNLV Houston's probably one of the better, smaller game matchups. Houston's a 1.5-point favorite. We'll get a really good gauge on both of these teams. At least on paper, this is probably the best UNLV team entering a season in 40 years. Obviously off a really good season last year. Willie Fritz for Houston's a really good hire, but this is a year zero situation. If you listen to the Big 12 podcast, we're really down on Houston this year. Under 4.5 wins is one of my favorite season win total bets that I made. North Texas, South Alabama. Next up, seen some North Texas money come in the last week on this one. 7 down to 5.5, but bad news for North Texas on Tuesday. Their Ole Miss transfer, their starting safety, Asheem Young, probably one of their better players in the entire spring for North Texas. He's out for the year, so that's a pretty big loss, at least at a non-offensive skill position for North Texas. Might come back to that one next week. We'll see where that line goes there. Next up, Nevada, Troy. Obviously, Nevada plays week 0. Again, I said the teams going from week 0 to week 1, game under your belt's not an advantage. With that being said, we did see money come in on Nevada in this game on Tuesday. Again, another market move on Tuesday. Both teams, you got first-year coaches. Troy, massive downgrade from the back-to-back Sun Belt champs. I question the time. I'm not going to question other releases and bets and market entry, but that was a peculiar one for me, considering Nevada's not expected to do well in week 0. I find it interesting that was fired upon this early in the process. Nevada taking some money there against Troy. Virginia Tech at Vanderbilt. Under got smashed on Tuesday. Thought process there is Vandy's got a new offensive coordinator from New Mexico State. They ran a very slow tempo, and Virginia Tech's very run-heavy, so that's why the under got some money there. Next up, Sam Houston State, Rice. Sam Houston's offense should be improved this year. And on the other side, best Rice team probably entering a season in a decade. So another good game to gauge a power rating. Not necessarily think there's a tremendous amount of value here, unless something newsworthy hits, but Rice favored by 10 should be a good quality G5 game. UCLA at Hawaii. UCLA has been the biggest fade in the market, arguably, this entire offseason. I mean, the win total opened 6.5. It's down to 4.5 in some spots. I mean, a 2-win move, oof, that's rough. This particular game, I mean, UCLA opened above 17, down to 13. They're not loving Deshaun Foster so far. Western Kentucky to Alabama. I don't have a bet on this game. I just think, generally speaking, I'm just way more optimistic than I thought I'd be on Alabama. I mean, when the Saban news hit, I thought this would be a great opportunity to fade Alabama this year, and they made an awesome hire in Kalen DeBoer. Recruiting is going well for the upcoming years. The roster instability was handled there. I thought their roster would get plucked from everybody across the country wanting to get those guys, those talented players from Alabama, and just never happened. And I got to tell you, Alabama could be a sneaky team this year in the national championship race. Not everyone's talking about them. I got them up to 4 in my power ratings. I got Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, Oregon 3. Bama's up to 4 with Texas's concerns at running back. Last game, Fresno State, Michigan. We might hit this game next week. I'll be anxious to see what Payne chooses. Under got a big hit. Agree with that move. Fresno's got an interim coach. Michigan, big-time downgrade. I mean, the win total is 8.5 in some spots. Defending national champ with a win total of 8.5. Tough schedule. Hardly anybody back on offense for the Wolverines. Question marks on the coaching staff. So I think they'll still be really good on defense. Maybe that's some of the reason why we've seen some of the under come in on this one. But be interesting to see if we deep dive that game next week. So, hey, guys, that was something different. 20 minutes, hit 30 games. Just giving you some general thoughts. Quick one-hitters there. A lot of it's because the market's been up 3-4 months on these games, and I just don't see a lot of value. So once we deep dive 4, 5, 6 of those games next week, maybe we'll come up with a good solid bet for you guys, and plus I'll have my non-powers 5. For those of you that hate the Fighting Irish, probably now would be a good time to, fast forward to the best bet 10, 15 minutes from now. If you like the Fighting Irish, I'm going to deep dive them. Obviously, if you know me, this is my team. For better, for worse, it's a love-hate relationship. Keep in mind, I became a fan when they were at the top of their game in the middle of the Holtz era, and it's been downhill for the last 30 years. I will say last season, record was 10-3, okay. But, man, statistically, this was one of the more dominant teams in modern Notre Dame history. I mean, yards per play margin, number 2 in the country, number 3 in yards per game margin, number 4 in scoring margin. The only other 2 teams that could say that, top 4 in those 3 categories, Georgia and Oregon and Notre Dame. So I got to be honest, for all their struggles at wide receiver and play calling, I mean, the offense ranked in the top 10 in yards per play and scoring last year. So that was probably a team that should have won an extra game or 2, particularly the Ohio State game if you rewatch it. Let's break it down, though, by position. I'll tell you what's been going on with Notre Dame this offseason, particularly in fall camp. Let's start at quarterback. Riley Leonard. He has been 100% since the summer. He did have 2 surgeries since the end of last season on that ankle, but there's no signs of any limitations. Last Saturday's scrimmage, he was using his legs considerably. Named a captain, more positive reports coming out compared to even Sam Hartman last year. Not Sam Hartman's fault. It was just they had a wide receiver issue and an offense coordinator issue last year. So you're hearing some positive things from the offense. They had a pretty good scrimmage where the offense barely beat the defense, although the defense rested a couple of guys. But Leonard, generally speaking, won't be the passer Hartman was, but obviously going to be a better runner. They like their depth at quarterback. You're going to hear me say that a lot at a lot of these position groups. I think this is, and the Notre Dame beat reporters will tell you, and the true blue fans that have been following the program for the last 3 decades will tell you this is probably going to be the deepest Notre Dame team in 30 years. Starting at quarterback, Steve Angeli was impressive as a starter in the bowl game. They got Kenny Minchie and C.J. Carr, 2 young, talented kids. In the future, I expect C.J. Carr to be the starter next year, but they got a lot of depth this year, starting with Leonard, who I think, not going to wow you as a passer, but again, Notre Dame hasn't had a guy who can beat you with the legs. I mean, it's been a while. At running back, you lose a really good running back in our Audric Estime, ran for 1,300 yards, 18 touchdowns, probably their top offensive weapon a year ago. With that being said, I really didn't downgrade the position. I mean, Jeremiah Love's expected to be the starter. Jadarian Price, Devin Ford, Kedron Young, Aeneas Williams, they'll all have roles. They're not afraid to play 4 or 5 backs. They like their backfield despite the loss of Estime. Love, if you're just going off of talent and recruiting rankings, this is probably the most talented Notre Dame running back in at least a decade, Jeremiah Love. I will say Payne, their 3rd down back, is out for the year. He was a good blocker, good pass receiver. So that was an unfortunate loss there. But again, I haven't downgraded the position too much. The position that I have changed considerably on offense is the wide receiver position. I think it's the most improved position group on the team by far, and one of the more improved receiver rooms in the entire country. Auburn is another team to keep an eye on. Auburn's really liking their wide receiver core. I've been reading the practice reports. But Notre Dame, 4 players transfer out following last season. You think, hey, this room is going to be decimated. They bring in some quality transfers, some quality recruits, some guys that are returning are now healthy. So, I mean, this could be a big reason why you saw their win total earlier this offseason at 10.5. Chris Mitchell's a guy, was a 1,000-yard receiver last year at FIU. Bo Collins was a multiple-year starter from Clemson. Jaden Harrison was a leading receiver last year, an All-American kick returner. They got Jane Greathouse, Jane Thomas. They're now healthy after being less than 100% most of last season. Jordan Faison was arguably their best wide receiver at the end of last season. He returns. Keep in mind, he didn't play at the first half of last year. I mean, they feel they can go at least 6 deep with quality guys. They had at some points last year 7 bodies to practice, 7 bodies, including walk-ons. And now they feel like they have 6 guys that can help them win football games. I mean, 6 guys that would be starters in a lot of seasons. So, and that doesn't even include a true freshman they really like, and Micah Gilbert. So, much improved wide receiver room for the Irish this year. Tight end position, also looking deep. Mitchell Evans returns. He tore his ACL in the middle of last season. He was having an All-American season prior to the injury. Appears to be 100% in fall camp. No, he has been on snap limitations, but the knee brace is off. He looks good. Again, they like their depth at the position. Eli Raridan, Cooper Flanagan was starting most places. The biggest weakness on the team, typical in Notre Dame fashion, has been their biggest strength. They can't put it all together in the last 3 decades, but it's the offensive line, which has been a team strength the last decade or so. Biggest news out of fall camp on the entire team, their left tackle, Charles Jagasaw, is out for the year. Keep in mind they already lost offensive tackles Joe Alt and Blake Fisher early to the NFL draft. Both of them were true juniors. It looks like Notre Dame is going to start a true freshman at left tackle, and Anthony Knapp. This is a kid, he's not a 5-star. He's only 6'4", 291, 3-star kid. It's not ideal, to say the least, but they seem to prefer him over a fifth-year senior, and Tosh Baker, who's 6'8", 320. I will say I was in attendance in the spring game. I keyed in on Knapp on a couple possessions because I just didn't know who he was. I liked what I was seeing. He's playing right tackle in that game as a true freshman. But my goodness, we'll talk about it next week. Not ideal. Going to College Station, playing a top 10 defensive front, starting a true freshman at left tackle. They're also going to start an undersized lineman in Emil Wagner at right tackle. He's 6'6", 290. Now, this is in the weeds, but I didn't think Blake Fisher was that great last year. I like Wagner as a prospect, so I don't think that's too big of a downgrade there. The coaching staff really likes their center, Ashton Craig. They like their right guard, Billy Schrouth. I think Craig will be one of the best centers in college football by 2025. The word out is the coaches kind of told their longtime, 3-year starting center, Zeke Correll, to take a hike. I mean, that's one of the reasons why he wasn't going to start. Craig was going to start over him. That's why Corral left for NC State. The expectation, at least in the spring and most of the offseason, was Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler, a couple of guys that got 500-plus snaps last year. They would compete, and the winner would get the left guard position, but it looks like Sam Pendleton, a true sophomore, is going to beat them out. So, very young line. We'll see. They certainly, I expect them to be better at the end of the season than they are at the start against A&M. Defensive side of the ball, I mean, last year was one of the better defenses in recent Notre Dame history, top 10 in most categories. A lot of guys coming back. Howard Cross, Riley Mills, probably the best defensive tackle duo Notre Dame's had in recent memory. Neither are huge. Mills is 6'5", 295. Mills, or I should say Cross is 6'1", 288. Mills is 6'5", 295. Both play hard every down. They're smart. They're productive. Cross is on many All-American lists. Very productive player. Got some NFL lineage, but both have played a bunch of snaps. They've been both on a snap count limitations in the fall camp. Nothing to be concerned about. They brought in R.J. Oben from Duke at defensive end. He's got a ton of experience. Jordan Botello's back as a starter at defensive end. The question, can he be consistent as a down-and-down-out basis? They've liked his leadership this summer and fall camp so far. They like Joshua Burnham and Boubacar Traore as backups. Overall, I mean, they're comfortable on the defensive front going 10, 12 guys. So, again, as deep as Notre Dame's been in 30 years at that position. Linebacker, kind of a concern. They lose their top two guys, Lou Fau and J.D. Bertrand, but Jack Kaiser was actually their highest grade player on defense last year. He's a 6-year kid with multiple master's degrees. He's going to be the guy with the helmet communication, talking with Al Golden. So a very smart kid that can coordinate the defense, a lot of experience. I mean, hell, he was playing in 2021. They like 5 guys in the rotation. Jalen Sneed, a former 5-star, they're going to use him in some pass rush situations. Drake Bowen, Kingston Viliamu-Asa, they'll be in the middle. They're both really young. Bowen's a true sophomore. KVA's a true freshman, but they're very talented. Jaden Osbury, a guy that can play some nickel, run sideline to sideline. So they like their linebacker core quite a bit, even though they lost their top 2 guys. Defensive back, Benjamin Morrison's a top 5 cornerback in the country. If you pop in the tape, he fared very well versus like Marvin Harrison last year. Xavier Watts, 7 picks last year. He actually won the Nagurski Award as the top defensive player in the country. He returns at safety. Christian Gray's a true sophomore. Got about 200 snaps last year. Graded out well. He's going to be the other starting cornerback. They got a couple of transfers, experienced transfers. Jordan Clark from Arizona State. He should start at nickel. Rod Hurd was Northwestern's highest graded defender last year. He's in a battle to be the other starting safety spot opposite of Xavier Watts. Cornerback depth's a concern. They're comfortable with 3 guys right now, but keep an eye on true freshman cornerback Leonard Moore. Great size at 6'2". That would be the biggest concern probably on defense. Other than some size, I would say that third or fourth cornerback, particularly the fourth cornerback, would be a little bit of a concern. Special teams, they brought in South Carolina kicker, very accurate, Mitch Jeter, 23 out of 25 on field goals the last couple of years. Their starting punter, surprisingly left post-spring. They bring in this Australian kid. You're going to get to know him because he's a unique guy. He's 24. His name is James Rendell. He's Notre Dame's first Australian guy. They finally got in the mix there. He's 6'6", 220. He's played professional Australian rules football. Different spin on the ball. So I think special teams is in okay shape there. Let's talk coaching staff. Again, I'm not being a Pollyanna here, but I think it's the best assistant coaching staff in 30-plus years. Offense coordinator Mike Denbrock comes over from LSU. That offense was number 1 in the country last year when he coordinated it. Al Golden, in my opinion, could be the best defense coordinator in the country, or at least the most underrated. Pop in the tape, see what he did to Ohio State the last 2 years, limiting that offense to 21 points and 17 points. Look what he did against Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley last year. I mean, Caleb Williams looked like a mess in that game. So I really think the world of Al Golden as far as a DC. To me, the biggest question mark's the head coach, Marcus Freeman, entering year 3. Can't have 10 guys on the field. Can't have a Marshall loss this year. It just, there's been a honeymoon. The honeymoon's over. You're now an experienced coach. You've been at Notre Dame a few years now. You can't have, you can't have some disaster performances. Those days got to be over. And speaking of the schedule, I mean, the toughest game I mentioned a few times is at A&M. But the expectation is Notre Dame's going to be favored in their remaining 11 games. So, I mean, expectation for Notre Dame's playoff or bust, and I think it's deserved. I think 9-3 would be a very bad look for Freeman. So, on the whole, deepest Notre Dame roster in 30 years, but questions at left tackle and overall in that offensive line probably prevent this team from, if you put Joe Ald on this team, I would be comfortable saying Notre Dame is capable of not only making the playoffs, but probably winning a couple playoff games. Without him and some question marks from what I see right now, I just, as a Notre Dame fan, I'll put that hat on. I just would be happy making the playoffs this year. I wouldn't be expecting a deep run. But enough of me talking. I've been talking for about 50 minutes. Let's get to the best bet here. And if there's been a reason, if you think I've been speaking softly, is I'm recording this at 10:30 at night. You probably hear one of my cat in the background. He's like, what the hell is going on here? Why are you talking loudly so late at night? He's not happy. So sorry for being a little I haven't been talking at my normal decibel level, so I'm not sick or anything. I was just trying to be courteous to it being late at night. Let's get to the best bet. We started off the podcast talking ACC football. Let's go back to the ACC. By far remaining my favorite win total bet is Syracuse under 7.5 wins. Let's call the price minus 150 or less. There's 142 at FanDuel, 145 at multiple books. I'll be fair with you guys. 150 or less will be the price we grade it at. Syracuse under 7.5 wins. What am I seeing? Well, first, I think the talent level has been upgraded, obviously, by Fran Brown. Great recruiting class, great transfer class, obviously bringing Kyle McCord. It's just the expectations are 7.5. You got to win 8 games to go over this. You look at the schedule, 8 of the 12 games, I have Syracuse either a favorite of 3 points or less or an underdog. So you're going to have to win a majority of those games, plus take care of business in your 3-4 big favorite roles. The 3 of them are big favorite roles. The other ones are just a 5-point favorite against Stanford as far as my power rating. So at NC State's probably a loss. At California is a tough game. Miami at home's a tough game. A loss probably. Virginia Tech's much better than them. That's a loss. Georgia Tech, to me, that's a 50-50 toss-up game there in week 2 for them. So I just think 8-4 is asking way too much for this program. I think 6-6 would be an okay season. 7-5 would be a good season. And for us to, a first-year coach with not any head coaching experience for the most part, and a relatively new roster, for Syracuse to go 8-4, they have to win a lot of 50-50 games, and I just don't see it. So Under 7.5 wins, minus 150 or less, Syracuse. That'll do it for this unique Week 0 podcast. Again, not much value on the board as far as Week 0. Again, if you got to bet it, Florida State would be the lean in that game. I'm not going to touch SMU Nevada unless the number continues to come back down. Don't be surprised that Montana State's that big favorite, and then Delaware State also with those travel issues. So not looking, believe it or not looking to take the dogs too much in Week 0. We'll see what happens there, and we'll also see what happens when the guys come back next week. Looking forward to it because there's a lot of big games. Florida, Miami, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, Georgia, Clemson, LSU, USC, and obviously we'll close it up on that Labor Day night talking BC, Florida State. We'll talk to you guys next week. Enjoy Week 0.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Furman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.